Have you ever suspected that this world is not what it seems?
Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?
Something strange?
Something extraordinary?
If not, do you wish you had?
Do you long to experience that which lies beyond the bounds of the mundane world?
Hidden somewhere just beyond the limits of our senses.
If so, then join us as we take you on a journey
That blurs the lines between the normal and the paranormal. Welcome to Paranormalcy. When we say paranormal, just what do we mean exactly? To define the word, we have to break it down into its component parts. First, the prefix para has multiple meanings, is derived from Greek, English, and French. Originally meaning next to or side by side, as in the word parallel, in its more modern interpretation, it has come to mean beyond, apart from, or abnormal. And then, of course, is the root of the word, normal. Just how do we define what is normal, exactly? Ultimately, it is our collective experience and understanding which underpins what we consider normal. These things can change depending on region and culture. However, what is normal in one part of the world is not in another, and the distance between those regions does not have to be that far. So what then is paranormal? While most would consider the modern understanding of the prefix and define it as something beyond or apart from the norm, I have come to understand it in its original intended meaning, something that is parallel or adjacent to reality. The term suggests that our world runs parallel to other worlds. Worlds that are able to be perceived in some ways and yet never intersecting. The world of dreams is very much like this. However, we'll find that sometimes it actually does intersect. The dreamscape is a world unto itself, perhaps many, each with their own richness and depth of experience. In this episode, we'll examine the many layers of the dreamscape, what is commonly accepted, our own experiences, and some conclusions that can be drawn from all of this. You may find that dreams are more significant than you previously thought. However, if you are listening to this thought is one you most likely have already had.
A dream represents the brain's efforts to make sense of sparse and distorted information. The cortex combines this haphazard input with whatever activity was already occurring and does its best to synthesize a story that makes sense of the information. James Collat. This is a modern interpretation of a dream, and it's pretty representative of the views of our modern rationalist society. People repeat these ideas as fact, and often they say things like, "The science is clear, I trust the science," or, as Nobel Prize winner Steven Weinberg has said, "Scientific consensus is culture-free and permanent." This falls in line with what people say on TV, in press conferences, in published books, or the textbooks that we read in school. But even Scientific American has criticized this narrow view of science as a fact. Of this phenomenon, they said in a 2021 article, even a modest familiarity with the history of science offers many examples of matters that scientists thought they had resolved only to discover that they needed to be reconsidered. Some familiar examples are Earth as the center of the universe, the absolute nature of time and space, the stability of continents, and the cause of infectious disease. Science is a process of learning and discovery, and sometimes we learn that what we thought was right is wrong. They urge people to stop, because while trust the science seems like a well-intentioned slogan urging people to be high-minded, educated, rational thinkers, it actually stifles real scientific thought and trust in new ways of thinking. It's the fallacy of presentism, when someone assumes that the current state of knowledge is the pinnacle and that things cannot improve or change. In the context of dreams, this is really interesting because we don't really know anything about them. Our clinical understanding of dreams is inhibited by our ability to do invasive testing, and limited to this or that part of the brain is active during dreaming, so it must play some role. But we still don't understand what purpose they serve, where they come from, or why they appear the way that they do. So my question today is, what if James Collat's view of dreams isn't the whole answer? What if our fragmented ideas about what dreams are and why we have them are just guesses that address only half of the question, and treating that like an established fact is a mistake? While our clinical understanding of dreams is a good basis, what of the mind? Does it gain some benefit from the activation of random parts of the brain, or does it initiate something that we do not yet understand and our body responds by activating parts of itself in order to interpret that? What if our brain only assists by lending processing power, and our mind is the primary processor of this experience? This is Rene Descartes' mind-body problem, and what it boils down to is a deceptively simple question. Are the mind and the body the same entity? This wasn't a new question when Descartes introduced it in the 17th century. Plato referenced it in his allegory of the cave. The material world that we see is only a shadow of a higher reality, and the immortal spirit is separate from the mortal body. Aristotle said, "It is not necessary to ask whether soul and body are one, just as it is not necessary to ask whether wax and its shape are one." They're separate, symbiotic things, interacting with each other and interacting with the world in different ways that we may understand in one context, but not in the other. So, again, what if our understanding of dreams isn't complete? What if what's missing is the component of the mind?
To make sense of what is going on in our mind while we sleep, we first need an understanding of the mind itself. This proves rather tricky since, despite all our efforts, we haven't made much progress in that department. The mind-body problem is something that has been hotly debated in the scientific community for some time now. While the classical materialist view is that consciousness arises from the matter of the brain, this view has failed to explain many phenomena that we experience. The brain itself has been known to have similar states of activity whether we're conscious or not. Moreover, our brain's activity differs very little between experiencing events versus remembering them. One might argue that the reality of the mind supersedes that of our waking life. Recently, a more modern view has arisen, one in which the brain is not a computer but a transceiver. Instead of housing and creating consciousness, the brain merely acts as a transmitter and receiver of it. If true, this would explain many supposedly psychic and paranormal phenomena associated with the mind. Things such as telepathy, and of course dreams. On the topic of dreams, I admit that I agree with classical psychology, at least in part. Many of my dreams are clearly my mind expressing hopes and fears, and yet, those are dreams which tend to be foggy and abstract. Things are not very clear in them, nor do I feel very lucid. They don't feel real. Many of those types of dreams are forgotten quickly because of the mundane, everyday subject matter. On the other hand, there are some of my childhood nightmares that I remember vividly because of the intense emotional impact they've had. Dreams of falling, being lost, or embarrassed tended to repeat throughout my childhood as an obvious expression of phobias that I would eventually be able to overcome. However, there are those dreams of monsters, supernatural creatures, and otherworldly powers that don't seem to be so easily explained. These dreams are not uncommon among many. Sarah and I have had our share. And just where do these ideas come from? One might argue that modern movies and TV play a part in conjuring up these images. Yet, these dreams do not always appear to have any rational explanation. One might argue that these stories that we see in TV and movies and books originally came from the dreamscape itself. The less mundane types of dreams I'm talking about always seem more vivid, oftentimes containing such stunning detail as to make anything Hollywood could conjure pale in comparison. There are many curious questions that arise when it comes to dreams, especially in my own personal experience. Why is it that my memory of dreams I've had at a very young age tends to be much clearer than my memory of the events that transpired? Why is it that my dreams often take place in settings that are so familiar, yet upon waking I realize that they are not? Do we return to the same dreamscape many times, most forgotten, only to be dimly aware that we've been there before? There was one case where I dreamt of my childhood home I had all but forgotten. In this dream, I was able to walk through this home and experience it in vivid detail. As I wandered through this house, it was as if I was actually there. Each room I entered sparked recognition and jogged my memory. This was an odd sensation if we are supposed to believe that the mind is creating these dreams.
Psychologists like Julian Jaynes and Calvin Hall have noted a change in the quality of dreaming from antiquity to present day, where dreamers in antiquity experienced visitations put on them by some outside force, usually attributed to God or angel, devil, or demon. And the dreams were more often auditory and had very little visual imagery. In contrast, modern dreamers experience their dreams as an event that they participate in, see themselves or their family in, and is an expression of their psychology rather than some other being's authoritative presence. Hall notes that modern dreams are surprisingly similar even across different cultures, ages, and genders, and I don't see any reason why the quality of dreams in antiquity would be any less similar. Jaynes theorized that the shift happened because we were developing conscious thought and edged into theories of when exactly we psychologically became people rather than animals. And this may be a good topic for its own episode, but I'd like to return to the mind-body dream issue for now. If our dreams have changed from auditory to visual over time, and if the subject matter has changed from the voice of another to the voice of the dreamer themselves or the experience of the dreamer themselves, that suggests both a shift in the dreaming experience from the auditory cortex to the occipital lobe, and a shift in the human experience of self-awareness, which involves the prefrontal cortex, the cerebral cortex, and the parietal lobe. This is a change that encompasses the entire brain. Did these systems become more developed, less flawed? How did this happen in the majority of the human race in a seemingly small amount of time, identified by Jaynes as sometime between the late Bronze Age and the Classical period? Morphogenesis is the biological process that causes a cell, tissue, or organism to develop its shape. It dictates everything that we are, from the earliest stages of embryonic development to our behavioral development to healing our wounds. When it goes wrong, it can even kill us by causing cancer. The theory of morphic resonance describes how these morphogenetic fields change over time, transmitted from past to current members of a species through a collective shared memory. Each individual both draws upon and contributes to the collective memory of the species, writes Rupert Sheldrake. This means that new patterns of behavior can spread more rapidly than would otherwise be possible. So, morphogenesis explains the development of the brain, and morphic resonance explains how it changed and how that change spread so rapidly. But now we've returned to the mind-body problem, because we still can't explain how dreams globally are so similar, or how shared dreaming is a possibility, or how connection with this dreamlike realm is possible through meditation or taking psychedelic drugs, without recognizing that the mind is capable of something that the body is not. Our brain has changed, sure, but so has our mind, and we're ignoring that.
While it appears that the human mind has indeed evolved throughout antiquity, so too has our own minds in modern times. A large part of my personal development happened in the dreamscape, almost as much as in the waking world. One of the most lucid dreams I ever had helped me conquer my fear in a way that I was unable to in the waking world. In this dream, I was in a garden of indescribable beauty. I could feel the sun's warmth on my face and the gentle breeze through my hair. I walked along a stone path that wound between different flower beds and grassy meadows, over bridges that spanned little babbling streams which wove in and out of each parcel of land. Rising into the air on the edge of the garden was a stone tower. I made my way there and walked inside to find it empty except for a spiral staircase that wound up to the top. As I made my way to the roof, I found that it was flat with no guardrails or features of any kind. I walked over to the far edge and looked down, and what I saw was dizzying. The tower was on the edge of a canyon, impossibly deep. So deep, in fact, that I couldn't see the bottom. Not even the light reached its depths. Something inside me stirred and understood immediately that this was the chance to conquer my fear. Inspired by this, I reached out my arms and dove off the edge. I fell further and further, faster and faster, and I knew then that the only chance I had to survive was to learn to fly. Finally, I caught myself with a power that I didn't know that I had, and I flew. I flew up out of the canyon, over mountains, rivers, lakes, and forests. Faster and faster until the whole scene became a blur of lights and color. I reached a speed where the scene in front of me became incomprehensible, and I awoke suddenly as if I slammed back into my body, bouncing on the bed. Up to that point, I had been suffering from recurring nightmares of falling. I had never had a nightmare about that since. So, why was this dream so lucid? It felt more real than reality itself. All of my senses were present in stark contrast to most other dreams. It almost seemed as if there was another presence there, watching me, encouraging me, beckoning me to take the next step in my personal evolution. This being my first lucid dream filled me with questions. Was it a real place? How many of my dreams are in a realm of my making versus somewhere else entirely? So if the brain is a transceiver of consciousness, is it possible that our minds travel to other realms not of our making? While intriguing, lucid dreams are only one part of the puzzle. Many have experienced dreams where loved ones who recently passed away have come to visit them. Moreover, some have dreamed of their loved ones at or near the exact moment of their passing. Stranger still are dreams that are prophetic, ones in which the dreamer can accurately predict future events. While rather mundane in subject matter, I've had a dream which made me realize that what I thought was déjà vu was in fact something different altogether. While we are familiar with the feeling, no one has a real explanation as to why we experience déjà vu. The phrase itself is French and simply means already seen. While many think it's a simple brain glitch, perhaps it's something more, and more accurate to say that what we actually see is something that we have seen before. That realization came to me from a dream. And this dream was entirely ordinary, usually the kind that I would likely forget. In this dream, my brother and I were playing a 2-player video game in an unfamiliar room. Upon waking, I remember thinking, that game was one that I've played before, I actually own it, and yet it didn't include a multiplayer mode. Perhaps that's why I remembered it, because it excited me. I would like there to have been a multiplayer mode in this game. Fast forward a few years and the sequel to the game had been released, and of course it came with the multiplayer mode. I was living in a new apartment at the time, and my brother was visiting, and we were playing this game together. And it was at that moment that I realized that I had dreamt of that exact moment years before. Since then, it slowly dawned on me that whenever I have déjà vu, I've come to realize that I've dreamed these scenes before. Oftentimes I forget those dreams because they are rather mundane and hazy, like most mundane dreams are. Yet, when I catch up to the moment in the present, the memory of the dream floods back to me. So just what does all this mean? If the mind is something that can travel to other worlds, it apparently can travel through time as well. Further, I was chatting with a coworker of mine recently, and he brought up the topic of déjà vu, and unprompted by me went on to share his theory about it, which exactly matched mine. He too firmly believes his experience of déjà vu is the remembering of dreams that he had. So how many others have experienced this, I wonder? How often do we dream of our future? If there are many timelines, do we dream of many different futures? There was another dream that I had where I was living in a familiar city with my mother and brother in a corner apartment. And in this dream, I knew the layout of our home, the route I walked to work, and many other very specific details, items in the house, their placement. It was as if I was actually living that life. When I woke up, I found it rather curious because upon reflecting on it, I realized that this dream could very well have been a life that we've lived if the man that became my stepfather never came into our lives. Was I witnessing an actual parallel life on a different branching timeline? Sadly, as with most of the stranger aspects of our paranormal life, there are more questions than answers.
While mainstream science rejects the idea that these alien landscapes can be shared, there are plenty of people who report seeing or communicating with the same entities or being in the same places, even seeing loved ones after they've died or seeing the death of loved ones before they die. Carl Jung studied parapsychological phenomena for many years, including dream and waking telepathy, shamanism, and mediumship, despite warnings from others in his field that he could ruin his reputation as a scientist if he continued to do so. Despite these warnings, he persisted, even saying, "I shall not commit the fashionable stupidity of regarding everything that I cannot explain as a fraud. Science cannot afford the luxury of naivete in these matters." Jerry Marzinski has a documentary, which I will link below, about people on methamphetamine seeing shadow people, and not simply the result of a twitch of the eye, but a shared experience of directly seeing the same shadow people. On a more personal note, mediumship, while often faked, is something that I myself have experienced in its true form through people that I deeply trust and lack the skills or motive to run a scam on me. It's something that I've done on several occasions, and information has come to me that I had no business knowing. I've had precognitive dreams, not of major events, but of mundane things that I was doing in places that I had never been, only to remember years later that I was there and doing those mundane things that I had dreamed about. Matt and I have had distinctly similar dreams, which we believe to be of past lives, and we've come up with the same information about the same things, not only without speaking to one another, but before we even knew each other. These ideas don't lack evidence. There are people all over the place that are experiencing things. They're simply difficult to study because of the fallacy of presentism and the mainstream rejection of parapsychological phenomena. The few researchers that have delved into these topics seriously have been ignored, even while their other research outside of the field was commended, sometimes with Nobel Prizes. But we live in a world where the mind must be a part of the body, because then we can understand it and define it, and the mind-body problem poses too big a threat to established science and our collective fallacy of presentism. Despite this pushback, the solution to the problem is becoming apparent. The mind and body are separate entities, and the mind does experience something while dreaming that the body only hints at in the pooling of blood in this or that cortex. By comparing accounts of dreams in antiquity with modern dreams and applying our knowledge of morphogenetic fields and morphic resonance, we can explain the physical reason why our dreams have changed, but we still cannot explain what dreams are and why dreams, visions, and hallucinations have a universally similar quality and shared characteristics. This suggests that our understanding of dreams is missing a critical component due to a collective fallacy which causes mainstream science and medicine to not accept the possibility that the mind and body are separate, and the mind experiences something more tangible and meaningful than random neurons firing during sleep. But we at Paranormalcy believe that we go somewhere when we dream, and if we're able to train ourselves properly, we may be able to learn something while we're there. Before we depart, we'll leave you with the words of Carl Jung. It is only in modern times that the dream, this fleeting and insignificant-looking product of the psyche, has met with such profound contempt. Formerly, it was esteemed as a harbinger of fate, a portent and comforter, a messenger of the gods. Now, we see it as the emissary of the unconscious, whose task it is to reveal secrets that are hidden from the conscious mind, and this it does with astounding completeness. When at last we penetrate to its real meaning, we find ourselves deep in the dreamer's secrets and discover with astonishment that an apparently quite senseless dream is in the highest degree significant, and that in reality it speaks only of important and serious matters. This discovery compels rather more respect of the so-called superstition that dreams have a meaning, to which the rationalistic temper of our age has hitherto given short shrift.
There is much more to be explored when it comes to the world of dreams. However, going any further will bring us into stranger territories still. We have come to understand that dreams can take us through our minds, through time, and possibly other worlds. As we go forward, the topic of dreams will return, as it seems it's intimately interwoven through many aspects of our paranormal journey. Hopefully, getting more insight from you and sharing your stories as well, dear listeners. In our next episode, we'll delve into the topics of reincarnation and past lives. We hope you'll join us.
Paranormalcy is produced and co-written by Matthew Miglioraci and Sarah O'Shea. We produce our own music and our own art. To support our work, please visit our website in the link below, where you can contribute to our crowdfunding, purchase the Paranormalcy book, and enjoy our art and music. We encourage you to reach out to us and share your own paranormal experiences. Our email address can be found on our website and in the link below. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.